All right, guys, thanks for coming in tonight. My name's Tommy Skinner. I do a little podcast called This Flippin' Podcast, and Texas Pinball Festival was nice enough to reach out and ask me if I'd like to interview Mr. Oursler here tonight. For those of you unfamiliar, he has been in the industry for going on 4 decades now, and he has designed some of our favorite titles. Personally, for me, it's Bram Stoker's Dracula. I know some of my friends really love Doctor Who, and he goes all the way back to, I believe, Phoenix was your first design. So thank you very much for taking the time to join us here tonight, Mr. Oursler. We really appreciate it.
Thank you all for coming.
So you did have an extended period of time where you had left the pinball industry, and then I know for the last few years you have come back, first working the majority of your time here with Highway Pinball out of England, which I'm sure was a pretty interesting experience as that company has had a bit of a turbulent history. So we'll talk a little bit about that. And now currently you are working here right in the state of Texas with Deep Root. Is that correct?
Yes, Deep Root.
Cool. So I believe that we had heard initially Highway planned to unveil their third game here at the show, which obviously plans have changed as ownership of that company has changed. But without getting you into any sort of trouble with non-disclosures, etc., I do believe you designed that game. Is that correct?
Yes, I guess it's probably going to be, I would probably say maybe the Pinball Expo, but I'm not sure yet what they're doing.
So there's a good chance we could still end up seeing that here at Expo, which is good news, as I know fans of yours will greatly appreciate that. That'll be your first official title, I believe, since Junkyard. Is that right?
Yes.
And again, unfortunately, we didn't get to see that here this weekend. Are you still in any sort of way involved with the finishing of that game, or have you completely exited from Highway at this point?
I'm completely away from Highway right now.
All right, so that would explain the movement over here to Deep Root. Is there anything you can tell us about that game at this point that we're allowed to know, or is that just completely off the table?
Well, we've got several games in the works over there, and mine will probably be the third game there that they're going to do.
Okay, so that would making that the next title to come out for them, correct?
Right, because Deep Root has a couple games already in the pipeline before me.
Okay, great. Overall, coming back to the pinball industry, and you did get to work with Highway, and your game, like we said, should see the light of day sometime this calendar year, we hope. Was that a positive experience for you, being back in pinball?
Yeah, it was great. I didn't think it was ever going to happen again.
Yeah, without a doubt, this pinball renaissance we've been experiencing has been wonderful, and it's really great to see some of the true legends of the industry back in, getting to design again. While you had worked for them, was that all done with you still here in the States, at the headquarters in England, or did you get to travel as well?
I mean, most of the time I was at home, but I made 3 trips over to Wales for a week or 2 at a time.
Okay, so that would definitely, I imagine it'd just be very difficult to go through the full design process without being near the machine. So I was very curious about that.
Yeah, it was a lot different experience. I'm used to having everything done right in one building.
Did that present some challenges for you?
It was a little difficult, plus they were a new company on top of it, so it made it a lot harder.
Yeah, as the startups, as we've seen within pinball, can without a doubt have some struggles over the last few years. I, for a brief period of time, took home an Alien pinball machine from this show last year, actually, and I was really impressed with it. And obviously, I want to see what they can do with that machine in the future. But I was really looking forward to seeing their third title designed by you here. So I'll wait till Expo. It's a little closer to my house anyway.
I'm hoping to have it ready by then.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'm sure they're going through some growing pains here. So to transition from them, what brought you to Deep Root?
Well, I heard they were looking for a designer, and I contacted them, and they offered me a job, and I decided to quit my day job and move here.
What were you doing for the day job at that point?
I was working for a division of Ecolab called EcoSure, and they were like a private health department. We had people that go around the country to every restaurant, hotel, and evaluate for cleanliness and food safety, cooking temperatures. And I mainly worked in the corporate office.
Are we safe eating everything here at this show?
Well, Hilton should be pretty good.
All right, good to know. So you turned in a resume and they offer you a job for Deep Root, and you've now relocated to Texas. And where were you before that?
I was living in Elgin, Illinois, which is outside of Chicago. I spent my whole life in the Chicago area. and now I'm living in San Antonio.
I'm originally a Chicago native myself, and my dad actually worked in Elgin for 20 years, so I'm familiar with the area. Coming down, how has that been as far as a change in lifestyle and work environment to transition to Texas and now back into the full time of a pinball company?
Well, it's great to get back into pinball, and the weather's a lot warmer here.
Yeah, without a doubt, the weather is warmer
Got
here.
the shovel sunshine.
You've been brought into Deep Root, and without a doubt, you're not the only one there with an experience. You're working with Dennis Nordman and John Papaduke as well.
Right.
Are there any other designers there with you guys? Or
John Norris is working for us remotely, like Dennis is.
okay, so you guys are the four major designers that are employed by Deep Root then?
For pinball, and then David Thiel is doing some sound work for us.
And David Thiel's done work with both Highway and Jersey Jack, and he's just kind of a legend when it comes to the sound in pinball. Now that you are there and you're working in it full time again, how would you say it compares to your time at Williams, where you did the majority of your work?
I mean, some things are similar. The only difference right now is we don't have the facilities to build parts like we did at Williams. Like if you're making a sample game, we'd go down to the model shop, give them a drawing, you'd have parts in a few hours or the next day, you know. Right now, it takes a little longer to get stuff done. Once we get into the new facility, things may be a lot different.
Do you have high hopes for them being able to reach that finish line of a final produced game anytime, any sort of time frame for that?
Well, they're predicting having games at the next TPF.
Okay, so looking about a year from now, and with the announcement of your hiring and the official formation of the company, it's a little bit over a year and a half or so, I'd say.
Trying to rush anything right now.
That's
Want to get into the
good.
new facility, get everybody set up before they set up any kind of a factory in there.
Have you guys, as part of the design team, caught wind of, or has it impacted you at all with the sort of blowback from some of the online communities of pinball with the concerns over new pinball companies? Has that affected you guys as a work environment?
Not really. I mean, people complain about anything that's new or different.
That's absolutely true. I remember.
Companies fall apart right away and some don't, you know. I think we're going to do pretty good, though.
That's good. Are you getting to, and again, I don't want to obviously get you in any sort of trouble, and I don't know what you can or can't talk about, but are you working on licensed or non-licensed games in general? Can you discuss that?
Both.
Both, okay. And is that you yourself or just as a company?
Both, too. I mean, I'm working on a license and a non-license, and same thing, the company, other people are working on some licensed, some non-licensed products.
That's very interesting. Is that differ at all from your time in other companies? When I hear you say you're working on, obviously a license and a non-license, that tells me multiple games. Have you always designed that way, or did you used to have a focus of like, I'm working on Bram Stoker's Dracula now and until it's done? Or is that it's always been where you had multiple things in the pipe?
I've always had more than one thing going, because when I'm working on one project, while I'm waiting for something to get done, I work on something else usually.
Okay, so that would probably almost be helped out with the Deep Root not having the parts facility there. It gives you time to spread out as you wait for one thing to work on the other.
Right, you get to a certain point where you're waiting to get something built up to start working on another game.
That's great. As you've gone to this new company and you've been involved with pinball, I think Phoenix came out in '78, so you're looking at 4 decades. What is something new technologically that you would say has really benefited your current designs that's helped you out?
I just think that all the new electronic systems they have are a lot different now. We can do a lot more than we used to. We were limited how many lights, how many coils you could put in a game. Now it seems like things are almost unlimited, except for the cost.
Yeah, and it always does come back to that sort of cost. Are you designing right now with a strict limit on this is your build of materials and this is all you can do, or is it more you're building what you want and then you guys will work on whittling it down to meet that?
It's kind of like what we're doing at Williams. We put as much as we can into the game until they say, all right, you got to take so much out of it. But if you get to keep it in, then we keep it in.
Great. So I think that's something as a player and a collector we love to hear, because we want to know we're getting those full featured games. And I like knowing that as you as a designer and artist, really, when it comes to pinball and how they're created, you're not being as limited on what your idea is.
I mean, I'm sure you heard the drop target story about Williams.
I don't think I have.
We'd always design every game put drop targets in it. And they say you got to take $50 out of the game. We take the drop targets out and put stand-up targets in, then so you get to keep everything else then.
So can we expect a lot of drop targets on your next game?
Possibly.
All right. Is there any feature that was sort of in fashion with pinball from the past that you want to reincorporate into a modern design?
I'm sure there is, but I can't really tell you.
Fair enough.
Somebody else may steal it.
Is that something that you guys are very mindful of as designers, as other people using your ideas?
I mean, especially with other companies, maybe if you're going to use something from the past that hasn't been done in a while, then you mention you're going to do it, somebody else may jump ahead of you with it.
I never really thought about that, but it does make sense. As we've experienced this renaissance, without a doubt, it's brought more of a competitive economic scene to the industry, as we have a room full of people here, and you guys as companies are fighting for their dollars really through your designs. Have you worked with some of the other designers that you're currently working with in the past on anything?
Well, I work with Dennis Norman and John Papaduke at Williams.
And as you guys are doing your games now, is it still a pretty much individualized thing, or are you guys working more towards a team design aspect?
I mean, we each work on our own games, but we're not hiding away locked in rooms like we were at Williams.
And that was kind of where I was headed. I know I've heard stories of the competitive nature of the design teams in Williams' day, and how that potentially through the individualized parts helped contribute to the downfall towards the end. So it's good to hear that you guys have sort of abandoned that. Are you excited seeing what somebody else comes up with? Is that like when I see a new game, I still get very almost hyper excited and sort of thing. Do you experience that as from the design aspect when you're doing your game or seeing one of your coworkers' games?
Yeah, I'm glad to see anybody making games now, just to see pinball coming back.
Yeah, this would have been hard to predict even a decade ago, I imagine.
Yeah, I know, because Stern was the only one for a long time.
Yeah, and
Now there's, what, a half a dozen companies?
Yeah, that's definitely what it seems like, without a doubt. Is there a theme, without getting in trouble or anything, that you'd love to design that you've never gotten to?
Well, the only one I could think of was one that Stern just ended up getting a hold of. We always wanted to do a Beatles game.
Ah, that's very
He ended
interesting.
up snatching a license on it.
Yeah, without a doubt. I know. I grew up. My dad worked nights driving, and I'd go to work with him often, and we listened to the Beatles' #1 album of all their greatest hits a lot. So I can definitely see how that would transition into a very good pinball machine. It'll be interesting to see how that turns out. With you guys at Deep Root, are you looking when you're doing licenses, sort of focusing on those music pins as they've become quite popular in recent years, or is it more of like film and television sort of things like that?
It might be a little bit of both. I mean, some of everything we're trying.
That makes sense, and it's kind of, I look back into the 90s, and I've only been in the hobby for about 6 years, but you see those games that have become very popular. Your Bram Stoker's Dracula is one that I think of, where it's based on a film that hasn't been super well critically received, but they led to really good pinball machines. Dracula, Congo, Johnny Mnemonic, and then you had Daddy East pulling in licenses through Sega, Daddy East, Sega Stern, like Back to the Future and stuff, but kind of delivering underperforming machines, but they had these really hot licenses that helped to sell. Right. Is that hard to predict as a pinball company or a designer? Are you looking for something that you think the public is interested in, or are you guys being presented from companies that want you to build something?
I mean, I try to do what I want to do. What license? If I do get a license, I like to pick the license. Not have it thrown at me.
And is that been how it's been going for you at Deep Root at this point?
Yeah, it seems to be going pretty good. I mean, at Williams, they got to pick most of the licenses except for one.
What one was that?
That was the Popeye one.
Yes, Popeye. I believe Eugene is in the audience here, and he's probably the #1 Popeye fan I've ever met. Yeah. So some people do love that game.
Yep. That was Python's baby, and I kind of got thrown into the project.
How interesting is it to see something like Kingpin that would have probably been getting announced towards the end of your time as the designer initially at Williams being remade 20 years later? Did you ever think we'd have remakes in pinball?
Never did. In fact, I just saw it today for the first time.
Is there anything from your past lineup that you would like to see be remade, or would you like to focus more on newer titles?
Probably newer titles that are, or do a sequel like I did with Comet and Cyclone and Hurricane, or some other games. Maybe I did Space Shuttle, Space Station.
So if you could do another sequel to one of your games, anything you wanted right now, what would you pick?
I don't know, maybe Doctor Who or something.
That would probably be a good one. I know that's a very popular game, and Doctor Who seems to have experienced a bit of a resurgence in pop culture.
It's been around forever.
Yeah, it's something I wasn't familiar with through my childhood, but I've come to know Doctor Who mostly through pinball, actually. And it's funny how many sort of entertainment realms or films and movies I've now seen because I played the pinball machine and liked it.
Yeah.
Well, is there any good story or any other question you'd like me to address here before we kind of open it up to the crowd?
Nothing in particular. I'm sure they're going to come up with some good ones over there.
All right. Well, we'll open it up here to the crowd and see what you guys have. And Pam's heading over to you with a microphone.
Hi, Barry. I was wondering, you were talking about licensing. With Whodunit, was Clue originally optioned? Because it's interesting that that game kind of felt like Clue, but it ended up not being. It ended up being generic. And then the development of that game seems like it was kind of late in the 90s, and it didn't have a lot of modes in it, or it was mostly multi-balls. So just kind of curious the concepts behind Whodunit.
We wanted to base it on Clue. I worked on it with Dwight Sullivan. We kind of worked on the rules together and some of the ideas for it, but we never bothered getting a license because doing a license game is always a hassle because you got to get approvals on everything. You do approvals on the artwork, approvals on this and that, and it's a lot easier to get a game done that isn't licensed. So we just decided to come up with our own theme, but you make it similar to Clue.
Barry, first, thanks for the almost 40 games that you've personally designed. They're wonderful, and I think you should be recognized for
Thank
that. Secondly, can you tell me anything about Williams Fire, which I love, and that game and the inspiration behind it? It's pretty unique. There's really nothing else like it, from the mechs to the ramps to everything about it.
And most of the mechs and the ramps were my idea, and I wanted to do like a fireman theme, and Mark Springer, the artist, wanted to do like a retro piece, like a Chicago Fire type thing. So he made it look like an old time thing with the horse-drawn carts with the water tanks on it and everything. And then I got the idea for the fire wheel from an artificial fireplace log I used to have, with a little wheel would rotate and look like it was on fire. So I designed my own little cylinder that went in there and put a light bulb in it. So when you're playing the game, it looks like the building's burning. Yeah.
Two quick questions. When you were building the Whitewood for Bram Stoker Dracula, did you have in mind that it was going to be an Aliens machine? Because I've heard that it was going to be Aliens first, and then you guys switched it to Dracula. And second question is, I love Dirty Harry, and I'm wondering, how was that pitched? And did you actually have like Clint Eastwood come into Williams to do the voices and things like that? How'd that all work out?
Well, with Dracula, originally it was going to be tied in with the Alien 3 movie that came out. And I had most of the game designed. I don't remember what I was going to do with the moving ball on there on the Alien feature. I don't think I got to that point with it. But Columbia Pictures came in and said that the movie's going to be delayed. They're rewriting the script. It's going to take another year. So they said, we have a new movie coming out called Dracula. So I said, fine, I'll do it. And I'm glad I did. I think it turned out to be a better game anyway. And then the second one?
What about
With Dirty Harry, it's a great game. I'm just wondering, did you have like Clint Eastwood come in, and how was that transition, and how was it pitched, and did you finish the game, or did someone help you finish it at the very end, or how'd that all work out?
With the speech on there, he was filming Bridges of Madison County, and our sound guy, I think it might have been Chris Granner, flew out to the site where they were filming the movie, and he recorded stuff in his trailer for us. I wasn't there, but he went there to get the custom speech done for us. But then everything else in the game I did on Dirty Harry.
I've got a quick question for you. is there any aspect of the design process of what you do back then, like from yesterday and today? Do you utilize a lot of obviously yesterday you didn't have the ability to use computers as much. Do you use computers more today?
Well, even when I was still at Williams, the last couple games I did, we did them on a computer. But I would always start off on a drafting table just to lay out the main shots so I can stand at the end of the drafting table and actually see how the shots are like a real game. And I still do the same thing now. I'll draw it up partway on the drafting table, then transfer everything over into the computer and finish the game from there. Because I draw it out full scale on the paper. So this way you can see out where all the ball guys, where all the ramps are, and look at it like it's a full-size game. You can't visualize it on a computer when it's only this big.
Hi, Barry. Big fan. Eugene from Springfield, Missouri. Two-part question. Some of my favorite machines, Joker Z and Popeye, like Tommy mentioned. I had a question on Space Station. Where did the idea of multi-ball, when multi-ball happened, you had a completely different lighting circuit for that. I thought that was the most ingenious idea. I love that. And the other question is, towards the late 80s, it seemed like you were, not just you, but other people at Williams were teamed up with another person. I was wondering how it was like to work with Python.
It was an experience. I mean, he always came through in the end, but you just never knew when he was going to get finished. I mean, he'd keep you hanging. He'd disappear for a week, sometimes months at a time, and nobody knew where he was. His wife couldn't find him. His mother couldn't find him. But then all of a sudden, he mysteriously appeared with everything done. Yeah, I know. He was good, though. He always did a good job when he did it.
I had another question for you, Barry. When it comes to your designs, do you have a, quote unquote signature feature that you try to put into a game, something that you associate with, this is an Oursler design that I want to include?
I don't know if there's any one thing that's in every game, but I just try to put something different in every game. Hopefully some new mechanism or new toy in the game, or some feature that hasn't been in there for either a while or ever.
Like the fire mech that you mentioned, we have a fire at my local arcade, and I always love when the buildings start showing the display like that through the lighting cylinder that you created. What actually brought you into working in pinball? Because as I teach high school myself, and as I'm working with students, I've never directed anyone like, hey, maybe you should look into a career of pinball design. What led you to that path?
I started working in the factory the day after I graduated high school and spent a couple years in the factory, and then went up to engineering as a technician. Then after I was at the company for about 8 years, I started designing. Okay, so it's definitely more of a sort of internship, apprenticeship type thing at that point in time, especially, I imagine. Kind of unexpected, yeah. Was it ever your intended career path in your mind, or were you just satisfied going in initially as I'm going to work in this factory? Well, that's where it started out. I never knew where I was going to go from there. It just worked out good. That's interesting. Yeah. I asked some friends from the hobby when I found out that I'd be getting to do this with you if there was anything that they wanted to ask, and one of the questions that they frequently presented me with from multiple people was, why do you make your outlanes so brutal on your games? And I keep telling people, you can adjust them. Can adjust them. That is fair. I like it. Does anybody else out there have a question?
I just have a general design question. As far as when you're designing ramps and going into the 3D elevated off the playfield kind of aspect, why does sometimes you make a ramp that's slower and smoother, like Dracula, more easily attainable, versus like a Dirty Harry, sometimes they're really steep, harder to shoot? What do you take into consideration when you're kind of making those decisions?
And we try to make the ramps as easy to make as possible. There's sometimes you got ramps crossing over and you got to make one of them higher than the other, and the shot isn't always as easy. Like I remember on Dirty Harry, that one side ramp, was usually a little harder to make than a lot of other ones. A lot harder than the one on Doctor Who that came off on the side.
How long, when you worked on a game, how long was it until you saw artwork on it? And then tell me what it was like for one of your games, for example, Gorgar.
Well, normally we start a game, they would give us 9 months from concept to production. And I'd usually have the game done in 7 months, but usually I say probably halfway through it, we'd start doing sketches or some kind of artwork on it to get an idea what it's gonna look like.
Hi, another two-part question. I just want the question that was asked before about the Operation Green mode in Space Station, where that idea came up with, because it's really ingenious. And when you were not in the pinball industry as a longtime designer, on weekends, do you like sketch out little ramps and play fields? Do you think of ideas for pinball even when you weren't in the pinball world?
I mean, once I left Williams for probably about 15 years, I really didn't do anything with pinball. I didn't do anything with them until Highway contacted me about 3 years ago. And then I started doing some games for them. But before that, it was just kind of out of it. There were no other companies around but Stern. So I just ended up getting a couple different jobs in between. I mean, now I got things going in my head all the time.
As a designer, Barry, have you ever been on the collector side? Have you had games at home?
Well, when I was working at Williams, I got a game for every one I designed. So I had a whole basement full. I mean, I had the most popular house on the block.
Have you maintained that collection, or as you left the industry, did your collection leave as well?
They're all gone. Over the years, I sold them off when I needed money for them. So I just got one game, my first one back the other day.
And what game was that?
Dracula.
It's a good choice.
Yeah.
When you're designing a game, as you've mentioned now with Deep Root Pinball, and you have both licensed and non-licensed, so it kind of really only applies to the licensed game, I suppose. But do you design the layout based on what the license is going to be, or do you instead create a layout and find a way to apply the license to what you've created?
Really, I try to find things about the license that I can use. You know, if it's going to be a movie or a TV show or a music or whatever it's going to be, I'll pick certain features out of there and try and incorporate them into the game. Like with Doctor Who, we try to fit something in there, the time expander, something that would be related to Doctor Who. I put a TARDIS on there, stuff like that. But, you know, Dracula, I put a coffin on the game, and just different things that would feature you would find in the movie, and then different ideas in there from the movie.
That makes sense. With your time at Highway, is there, you said you did a few games. Are we allowed to know how many? Is it 2, 3, 4?
I designed 3 games for them, but they haven't produced any of them yet, though.
Okay, gotcha. Back to the crowd.
Last question. What is your favorite mechanism that you've made in all your machines?
Probably the Mist multi-ball in Dracula. Between that and the time expander.
Can you talk any about how the concept came about for Junkyard?
The original idea I had for Junkyard is I wanted to use all the different parts and mechanisms that were used on previous games and just make like a pinball junkyard out of it. But when I started laying it out, the parts didn't seem to fit properly. So I just decided make it like a real junkyard. Put refrigerators and toilets and old cars and stuff in there and just make it like a junkyard. Put a junkyard dog. And then I kind of worked in it with Dwight with the rules and some of the other crazy gimmicks that we did on there. I never got to finish the game. I got about 90% done when they had the big layoff there, and then Dwight had to finish the game.
Hey Barry, I have a question. I noticed with Doctor Who and Pinbot, there's a lot of similarities in the playfield. did you kind of use Pinball as any kind of inspiration for Doctor Who, or what kind of ideas went into that?
Yeah, a little bit, because I like the mechanism on Pinball, but I wanted to do something more with it, so I ended up doing a 3-level playfield in there that would move up and down and do a lot more than just open and close and shoot two eyeballs in.
How much input do you have into the rules of your games?
Well, in the past, the early games, I probably did all the rules, but then the last few years that I was doing them, I would talk with the programmer and we'd work out sets of rules on the games. And, maybe somebody might come up with some better idea or some way to improve on what I was thinking on doing with it, or they may have some good ideas that I might like. So we try to work together on it then. And that's how it's going to be from now on, I think, too. Just work with other people, with the team.
Would you say that your previous games were more involved different type of work than today, as far as the rules and the rest of it? Because I guess what I'm trying to get at is that would you say that the rules are more of a collaboration between different people today than it was as of yesteryear?
Yeah, I think now a lot of it is like a whole team project now, basically working on the rules for the games. A lot more people are giving input on it because they're going a lot deeper with some of the rules. I mean, a lot more than I think they even should on some of the games out there. But it's good for the expert players. It gives them a chance to to keep playing. But you got to make it easy enough so anybody can play it.
You mentioned that John Papaduke and Dennis Nordman were working with you over at Deep Root. Are there any other familiar names, particularly on the software side?
There's another designer, John Norris, is working with us too, but nobody really on the software that's been in the pinball industry that I know of.
Is that kind of refreshing to get some new blood in there on the software side and see what sort of original ideas they bring?
Yeah, I think so. They're coming up with some good ideas, the people I'm working with.
And another question kind of relating to your approach to design, one of the things that I think has really contributed to the renaissance and popularity of pinball over the last several years is the increase in competitive pinball play, as well as the sort of streaming and YouTubing of top-level players demonstrating what these games are all capable of through that deeper code. And sometimes, are you considering that basically the competitive mindset when it comes to creating your layout at all?
I don't really think too much about that when I'm doing the layout, but I think any game we can take and make it a competitive game, though.
Through allowing sort of, like you said, closing the outlanes or opening them, that sort of thing?
Right.
Anybody else in the crowd with a question? There's one.
Does it enter into your mind as part of the process at all in designing games from back when you started, when it was more an operator-driven market versus a collector-driven market now?
What was the question, though?
Does it make any difference in the way that you're designing games or thinking about, layouts or rule sets or anything like that, and the fact that back in the day you were mostly going to be selling games to operators versus now mostly, or a major component being home collectors?
And I still try to make the game so it's for everybody. I mean, if it's simple enough so an operator can run the game, but difficult enough so the good players can still come back and play and they don't get bored with it.
So when you're staring at a blank whitewood, what are the first couple of things that you start to put on the field to have it kind of take shape? Is there any typical process that you go through?
A lot of times I'll just start with just the bottom with the flippers and the slingshot kickers and just start thinking what else I want to put on the game. If it's a tie-in with a license, I'll come up with some gimmick or toy and figure out where I'm going to put that on the game and then kind of build around it. If I got 2 or 3 items, I'll try to locate where I want those to go and then start figuring out where to put the ramps and the targets and bumpers and whatever else is going on there, but try to build around a central feature.
When you're designing a game these days, do you also have input into the design for the animations or the video aspect?
I mean, I may come up with suggestions, but usually the people that are doing the programming or the dot matrix stuff will do a lot of the stuff. If like I said, like with Dracula, we decided to do certain things on it, or Doctor Who, we wanted certain ideas, but then the animator would do all the actual work on it and, make it look good and make a game out of it, like a video mode for it or whatever.
Any other questions?
Pam, to your left.
Barry, I've been pondering the idea of working on kind of a one-off design pinball machine for myself, not with the intent of actually doing this professionally, but I was wondering if there were any, if there was any guidance you might give to someone who had an idea that they wanted to work on and wanted to flesh it out some.
Well, the first thing is, draw it up on paper and see how it looks first. And then build up a whitewood and, just play it with just the basic parts on it. Try and get all your shots on there, your ball guides, your ramps you want to put on the game, if any, bumpers. Try to figure out where you want all the stuff. In fact, if you had like paper, or you can even draw it up on paper and have little cutouts and place them on there, like get all the standard parts and put those where you want them and then kind of draw things around it. That way it's easy to move stuff. And then once you put it on a computer, I mean, if you got a CAD system or whatever, you can easily move things. Or you can even do the whole thing on the computer if you want, and make up little templates for all the different standard parts.
In your design process, do you have players come in or other people play the game to give you feedback?
Once I get to a certain point with, if I have a whitewood that's playing, I'll have other people come in and look at the game and play it and see what they think of it. Maybe somebody might have a suggestion out, maybe you make something better on the game, or if something isn't working 100%, maybe they might have an idea how to fix it. Because not everything works right the first time.
I'm curious, Barry, after your experience with Highway, and now sort of the delayed or waiting process until we see those games that you've designed go into a production, do you have any sort of hesitation about working with newer pinball companies because of that, or are you just happy to be getting paid to design pinball again?
I mean, I'm not too worried, because I think Deep Root's going to do a good job, and I'm not hesitating at all. That's why I moved here.
Yeah, that is a big life change to, cross halfway across the country for a job. I'd be scared to do that regardless. Mm-hmm. But again, with an industry like pinball, there probably are. The reality is it's a limited job market. There's not a ton of people out there trying to offer up design positions. Do you know, as I think you were one of the first names really after the John Papadukes came out as being hired by them, any sort of timetable on whose game's coming out first or anything like that?
Well, I know their original theme, I think, is going to be first, and I think Papaduke's probably will be next. And then mine will probably be the third game, is what I'm thinking.
All right. I think we got another one coming here from the crowd, it looks like.
I have a question. At Williams in the early 80s, I noticed there was kind of a run of games like Black Knight, Solar Fire, Grand Lizard, Pharaoh. They all kind of had like a lot of similarities with the upper play field and the timer drop targets and all that kind of stuff. Was that something that Williams kind of asked you guys to incorporate? Because I noticed they're all different designers that do the different games, but they all have such similarities. Was that something like when the metal ramp came out, they were like, everyone has to use a metal ramp, or I don't know if you could talk a little bit about that time period.
Well, after Black Knight came out, the game did really well. They wanted every designer to work on a 2-level game, and back then, that's all we had were metal ramps. There were no plastic ramps at the time, not until Space Shuttle. So we all had to put metal ramps that get you from the first level to the second level on the games. So I did Solar Fire and I did Jungle Lord. And then there was Pharaoh, and I'm trying to think, I think there might have been another one somewhere in between that somebody else did.
Barry, if you had to pick one sort of era of your designs, whether it be sort of solid state, the DMD era, or what I consider to be the modern, where we now have sort of video displays, what would you say you've enjoyed designing the most?
I don't know, every period seemed to have their own thing I liked about it, but it seemed like they just kept getting better as we went along because we kept doing more with them. When I left Williams, we were already doing the DMDs in there. So we can do a lot more animation on the games.
Go ahead, sir.
2 questions. Can you tell us how plastic ramps came about? Because you were right there during that period. And the other thing is, if you remember back, how did 1 1/16 inch ball become the standard for pinball?
The ball question, I'm not sure. That's been 1 1/16 long before I even started working there. But as far as plastic ramps, I had them on Space Shuttle. It was the first game. We had an idea for doing some vacuum form products, and it was just a basic plastic ramp that would drop the ball back off on the play field, but it was something different. The metal ramps were a lot more expensive, a little more, they clanged a lot, and we started off with just black ramps, but eventually we went into clear ramps where you can see through them, but it was like just the first time we used ramps.
Has there ever been a game where you've had to severely alter your initial design of a ramp due to something along the production process or how it played?
Nothing major. Usually we try to fix that in the whitewood stage. If it isn't moving smoothly, you may change the radius on a curve or something to make the ball flow smoother. But we try to get that done long before production, because then once you get the mold made and you're making parts, it's going to cost you a fortune to fix it.
When you did Go Guard, it was the first talking pinball machine. Now you'll be working with David Thiel. So how many speeches are you going to have in your game?
In which game now?
Go Guard.
Yeah, right.
It was the first talking pinball
Right.
machine. It spoke 8 words.
Right.
Now today we got thousands of words.
Oh, I know.
Sound. So what's your game going to be like compared to it?
It'll probably have a lot more than 8 words in it.
But you were a start of it,
That's going to be. It'll speak in complete phrases.
Was the idea for speech in Gorgar yours, or did that come as a team process?
That was kind of just luck, really. They had come up with a speech process for games, and I had the next game that was coming up, and it just happened to work out for me. I had a good game to start with, but I think the speech probably helped it sell a lot more games.
Yeah, it's hard for someone like me who's come into pinball in the last decade, and that's all I've experienced, to go back to the mindset of never hearing a game talk, and suddenly you walk into the arcade and you're hearing a voice talk to you. Mm-hmm. So it's definitely cool to be part of that revolutionary change in pinball industry.
Barry, after you did Pinbot, there came Bride of Pinbot, but you weren't on the team for that one. Was there a reason? Were you doing another project at the time or something? Or?
Yeah, I was on another project, and Python wanted to do another version of Pinbot, so he got someone else to work on it with him. Because Pinbot was really his idea for the theme. I designed the game, but Python did the artwork, and I kind of designed the game around his artwork, which was the first time I ever did that. He had a layout, the flipper fingers and all the other stuff that you saw in the game, the visor. But then I actually made a game out of it and then added the bank that would move up and down and some other features into it. But then he went on to do Bride of Pinbot on his own then.
Right along the line of that, when Jackbot came out and it basically used your initial playfield layout, were you involved with that process at all?
Not in that one either. I was busy on something else, and they needed another game to fill the production line, so they just rethemed the game.
Were you consulted on that at all, or did you mind, or anything like that?
Very, very little. They just took my whole game design and just put all new rules and new artwork on there.
What do you see in the future of pinball?
I don't know, I'm hoping we're going to sell a lot of them. That's all I can say right now.
What was that?
You got about 5 minutes.
Yeah. Anybody have any sort of last minute question here? We're getting ready to wrap up as our next session starts in about 5 minutes or so. Got one more over here to the left.
Do you have a favorite game of your own design and a favorite game of other people's designs?
Well, mine, I like the Bram Stoker's Dracula. And then I've got probably different games by every designer that I like. You know, like Steve Ritchie, I liked T2. With John Trudeau, I like Creature from the Black Lagoon. You know, Dennis Norman, probably Elvira. You know, Mark Ritchie, I liked Indiana Jones, or that, or Taxi. I mean, everybody's got something different. It's hard to narrow down to one favorite. Yeah.
Have you found yourself to be an avid player? Like, did you spend a lot of time just playing pinball?
Not in the last 20 years. Before, I played a lot of it. I mean, that's all I did. But for a long time, I wasn't doing anything with pinball for a while.
It's understandable.
Last couple of years, I've been playing a lot more now.
Okay, that's nice. It looks like we've got one more question here in the third row.
What made you want to do like Cyclone and Hurricane and Comet? What made you want to do that style? Did you frequent kind of going on those kind of rides as a kid?
You know, I grew up in Chicago. We had our amusement park called Riverview that closed in '67, and I spent a lot of summers going there. And I wanted to do an amusement park. I was going to call it Riverview originally, but then changed the name because most people around the world wouldn't know what it was. So I decided to name it after one of the roller coasters that was in the park. And just try to pick up ideas, you know, that was in the park. You know, put the Ferris wheel came on the next game, but, you know, they had like a shooting gallery and just different other features that you see in an amusement park. You know, some of the rides, the roller coaster rides, so made the ramps and the roller coasters. And then started doing a whole series of them. You know, Comet did well, so I'll do Cyclone. I'll put a Ferris wheel on it. And then the next game, put a double Ferris wheel. Just try to keep building and find names of different roller coasters and use those for the names of the game.
All right, guys. Well, if that's the end of the questions, it looks like we will wrap this up. Mr. Oursler, thank you very much for giving us your time today. You look very